The player needs to be impressed and constantly surprised as he travels through Hyrule. I think that we need to always keep a certain tension in the air, or else players risk getting that creeping sense of dullness. But I'm scouting the horizons of Twilight Princess, looking for ways to amaze and inspire fans, and to see the Legend of Zelda world in ways that will take them to places they've never thought possible. Asushi Miyagi. This is Legendary Adventures, a Legend of Zelda playthrough podcast. We've collected the fused shadows and the shards of the Mirror of Twilight. We've cast down the usurper kings, Zant and Ganon, saved Zelda, and bid farewell to Midna. Now this week we're taking a look at the world and legacy of Twilight Princess. The world of Hyrule in Twilight Princess clearly takes inspiration from both A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. It's larger than the worlds of either of those two previous titles. Hyrule Castle is in the center and clearly reflects the design of A Link to the Past, which also placed the castle in the center. The majority of the map is arranged in a rough ring shape around the castle. Arranged along this ring are 6 field areas, each connected by narrow canyons. There are also 3 narrow areas that extend off the ring and form into dead ends. One to the north, one to the south, and one to the east in the GameCube original. This would of course be on the opposite side in the mirrored Wii version of the game. There's also additional areas that are essentially detached from the rest of the world, but players still have means of accessing them. They include the desert and the Sacred Grove. Each of these areas are in turn split between 6 provinces in the game. Let's take a look at each of them. The first and smallest province is Ordona. This is Link's home province. It contains Ordon Village, Ordon Ranch, Link's house, and Ordon Spring. Notably, Link's home is a treehouse, likely a nod to Ocarina of Time and Link's treehouse in that game. There is a suspension bridge just north of the spring, and just north of the bridge is the province boundary. Ordona is ultimately split across 4 screens. The path which runs from the suspension bridge down past Link's house is narrow. The space widens up at the village and the ranch. Players will spend probably half of the first hours of the game inside Ordona Province, and they'll be required to return here to get the iron boots from Mayor Bow. Beyond that, I suspect many players will not spend much time here at all. It's located far off the beaten path, which makes sense as it's a vassal of Hyrule and is considered outside the kingdom proper. Perhaps due to its origins and inclusion in early game demos, and perhaps due to its setting as an early game tutorial, Ordon is fairly dense for its size. There's a minigame here, goat herding. Players are required to play it twice, but they can also choose to challenge it for a 3rd time to get a piece of heart. There's a hidden grotto inside the goat barn. Players can fish in the pond. There's a shop run by Sarah, and multiple characters and houses to interact with. There is, however, one house that's never accessible. This is Fado's home. It sits under a tree opposite Sarah's shop. In a 2007 interview with Nintendo World Report, Eiji Aonuma gave both the in-game reason for that, and the real-world reason as well. He said, "Because Fado is always on the ranch, he doesn't want to reveal too much about his private life." He laughed. "But because there's a door there, we would have needed to create a room inside. However, there wasn't enough time to do that." To the immediate north of Ordona Province is Faron Province. It contains Faron Woods, Faron Spring, the Sacred Grove, and the southern Hyrule Field area. 2 dungeons are here, the Forest Temple and the Temple of Time. It's also the resting place of the Master Sword. The population of the area is sparse. We do meet 2 shop owners, Koro, the oil salesman, and Trill, the bird who runs a potion shop. The monkeys and Skull Kid are also residents of Faron. Players are required to return to Faron more often than they are required to return to Ordona. The early tutorial segments are split between Ordona and Faron Woods. Players will also return here for 2 trips to the Sacred Grove, and they will return to Koro's home on their quest to reach the City in the Sky. There are at least 3 hidden grottos in the province, which can be accessed by Wolf Link, 2 in the South Faron Field, and 1 in the Sacred Grove. There's also 4 golden bugs and 6 Poes hidden inside Faron Province. in addition to one of the 6 Howling Stones which players need to interact with to learn the hidden skills. Eldin Province sits on the east side of Hyrule, in the unmirrored GameCube version of the game, that is. Remember to flip these directions for the mirrored versions. Eldin is home to 2 field areas. A smaller field to the south contains Kakariko Gorge and 2 hidden grottos, plus an optional cave, one of 4 in the game. The cave can be accessed as soon as players have bombs, but it's best to save it until after players can turn into a wolf, in order to round up the Poes hidden inside. There are 8 Poes hidden in Eldin Province in total, and 8 gold bugs. The northern Eldin field area is where 2 of the game's horseback boss battles take place. Those are the first battle against King Bulblin and the 3rd phase fight against Ganon. On the north end of the field is the Bridge of Eldin. There's a canyon which leads to the border of the province, and there's another optional cave hidden just north of the bridge. It's, in my opinion, the best of the caves. It's a vertical space that sees a return of the magnetic walls from the Goron mines. There are 3 villages in Eldin Province. Kakariko Village sits just north of the gorge. It's a worn-out desert village located in a canyon. The Eldin Spring occupies the southern end of the village. There is verticality to the space, but it's largely only in the optional areas that see players scaling the canyon walls. There's a real Old West vibe to Kakariko, but the village itself is largely empty of permanent residents. It is strongly implied that most of its residents were killed or possibly transformed into monsters during an attack of the Shadow Beasts. In a 2007 interview with Nintendo Dream, and translated on Zelda Dungeon, director Eiji Aonuma said, "This time, only Hyrule Castle and the castle town are flourishing. The rest of the areas are pretty much in a decline. Only the shaman Renato, his daughter Luda, and Barnes the bomb shop owner are proper residents of Kakariko. The 4 kids from Ordon, Colin, Beth, Tallow, and Mallow, take up residence in the village for most of the game. Mallow even opens a shop, and becomes the dominant capitalist force in the game. After completing the 2nd dungeon, a number of Gorons will fill out the village, though they're clearly not permanent residents. Most are only there during the day. A Goron child runs a potion shop at night. Kakariko is one of the most important locations in the game, and it will likely serve as a hub for players. The main quest will see players visiting this village multiple times. I can think of a minimum of 4 required visits. First to purge it of the Twilight and rescue the children, then to rescue Colin, then to bring the injured Zora Prince, Rallis, to the village, and again to restore Ilia's memory while opening the path to the sky. I, however, visited many more times than that as I tackled side quests and visited shops in town. It should be noted that Kakariko does not resemble the Kakariko villages of either A Link to the Past nor Ocarina of Time. Aonuma explained in that 2007 Nintendo Dream interview that they did not necessarily go in planning for this to be Kakariko Village. He said, "We clearly didn't design Kakariko Village to reflect that 100 years had passed. We had this town, and when we decided the events that would take place there, we also decided it would be Kakariko Village. That's just the way it was." That said, there are elements that are clearly intended to invoke the Kakariko of Ocarina of Time. A graveyard is located behind Renato's sanctuary. Its inclusion here is a clear callback to Ocarina of Time. However, this graveyard holds a hidden pool unlocked just prior to the Lakebed Temple. A shortcut to Lake Hylia can also be found behind some boulders at the bottom of this pool. The village also sits at the foot of Death Mountain, just like Kakariko in Ocarina of Time. As expected, Death Mountain is a vertical space. The Goron City is also vertical. There is a hot spring here and a store. We also find the 2nd dungeon of the game, the Goron Mines. The Goron City and their mines all appear to be more industrial than they did in Ocarina of Time. Death Mountain also holds one of these 6 Howling Stones. The 3rd and final village in Eldin Province is the Hidden Village. It's located on the northern border of the province, behind a wall that players cannot get through until they reach a certain story beat in the game. It is interesting to note that the Hylian language seen in Twilight Princess is a cipher for English. In the past, Hylian characters were a cipher for Japanese text. There are 3 signs in the village. 2 right near the entrance only say "Welcome" once deciphered. A larger billboard near the center of town reads, "Welcome to Old Kakariko." As with the other Kakariko, it doesn't match the Kakariko of A Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time. It is instead a true stereotypical Wild West village, like those seen in the movies. It's flat with two-story buildings lining the main street, providing the only elevation. Our first visit here even features a shootout against a group of 20 Bulblins. The village has only one human resident, Impaz, a Sheikah woman. In a way, the Hidden Village and Kakariko seem to be a slantwise reference to Zelda 2. You'll recall in that game, Kasuto was destroyed and was home to only one resident, while a new village, the Hidden Kasuto, was full of people. In this game, the roles are reversed. The old village is hidden and is home to only one person, while the new or newer village is open, and while not thriving, it at least features more than one resident. The hidden village only has to be visited once, though the game strongly pushes players towards making at least 2 visits. There's a Howling Stone hidden here, and a side quest involving the non-human residents of the village, a chicken and 20 cats. Players are challenged to a cute out, and they have to locate and talk to all 20 kittens in order to get a heart piece. The largest province in the game is Lanayru. It occupies the center and west side of Hyrule and much of northern Hyrule. Lanayru features 3 field areas. The largest one is to the north of the castle. It's roughly the same size as the southern field in Faron. There's also 2 other smaller fields within Lanayru. They're located west of Castletown and south of it. There are 8 gold bugs hidden within Lanayru Province and 19 Poe souls. There's also 2 hidden caves. The second best one in the game, in my opinion, is located in North Lanayru Field. It features a return of the ice pushblock puzzles from Snowpeak Ruins. There are also 8 grottos hidden within Lanayru Province. There are 2 villages in Lanayru, and 2 occupied areas that don't quite fit the role of a village. The first and largest is of course the one at the center of it all, Castletown. In fact, it might be better to call this a city rather than a village. Castletown is essentially built on a loop. There's a central fountain area, with 4 paths that branch off of it. The path to the north leads to the castle, and it's not part of the loop. The castle, of course, is the final dungeon of the game. The other 3 paths all connect to the east and west paths, looping to the south to connect with the central path. Castletown is home to Agatha the Bug Princess, who kicks off the Gold Bug quest. Finati, a fortune teller, provides hints to the players. Giovanni kicks off the Poe Soul quest. There's also the Star Game and Telma's Bar. There are a few shops within Castletown, the Castletown shop that becomes Mallow Mart, a Goron hot spring, and some Goron merchants that are hidden inside a building. Castletown is intended to be something of a hub for the game. The main story quest brings players through Castletown multiple times, and in the second act, players are encouraged to check in at Telma's Bar to get information on where to head next. Though players don't actually have to check in, it is possible for them to track down the members of Telma's resistance group through other means like simply exploring. To the southeast of Castletown, we find the Great Bridge of Hylia. It's a weathered and slowly crumbling structure. Archways on either side of the bridge are crumbled away. Decorative features in the center of the bridge are broken, and the supports underneath seem to have largely fallen away, but it somehow still stands and is sturdy. This is the location of one of the horseback boss battles in the game, a second battle against King Bulblin. On the south side of the bridge is a massive tree stump which players can walk under. Shoes are found here. Lake Hylia is beneath the bridge. At the lake we find Falby's Flight by Foul minigame, and Fire with his cannon which allows us to exit the lake. Plum the Bird operates a minigame from the lake during the second act of the game. The Lanayru Spring is also here, and a Howling Stone. The fourth and final hidden cave, and the game's third dungeon, the Lakebed Temple. We could also consider that the 7th dungeon in the game, the City in the Sky, is found here at Lake Hylia because that's where the cannon that players use to launch themselves to the city ultimately ends up. To the north of Castletown and to the north of Lanayru Field, we find Upper Zora River. We find a Howling Stone and 2 attractions. The first is Iza's River Ride minigame. It carries us downriver to Lake Hylia. The other is Henna's Fishing Hole. We can fish from the shore using Link's fishing rod, or we can rent a canoe from Henna and take part in some real fishing. There are a lot of character and world-building bits and bobs to find in Henna's shop, as well as a minigame, Roll Goal. The Fishing Hole was a passion project of programmer Kazuaki Morita, and it shows. The fishing hole has mechanics and features not seen anywhere else in the game. Namely, all 4 seasons can be found in the fishing hole. The seasons move in order in a cycle. In spring, players will find lush greens and trees filled with pink cherry blossoms with petals floating gently in the wind. If players leave and then return, the season will shift into summer, which is full of deep greens all around, even in the trees. The only things seen in the air during summer are clouds and birds in the sky. Leave and return again, and the fishing hole will shift into fall. The grass has largely turned brown with only patches of green remaining. Leaves in the trees are a rusty color, and leaves fall through the air toward the ground similar to the cherry blossoms of spring. Leave and then return again, and the fishing hole will shift into winter. The ground will be covered in snow. There are no deep drifts to be found, but all surfaces are dusted with white. The trees are not bare, but instead feature frosted over leaves. Additionally, the water in the lake of the fishing hole will become clouded over by mud with rain. While rain was common in the Wind Waker and helped to add to the lively feel of that world, it seems fairly rare in Twilight Princess. It can rain while players are out exploring the overworld, but I can recall only ever seeing rain twice during my playthrough for this podcast. Once while I was out in Hyrule Field, and the other time when I was in the fishing hole. In his 2007 interview with Nintendo Dream, Aonuma made it clear that Morita put his all into the fishing hole, ensuring the final result seen in the game matched his vision. Aonuma shared, "When Mr. Morita told me he wanted to include weather changes, I thought, you want to go that far? If you have some extra time, I'd rather." But he said that there would be no fishing without that, so I told him to go ahead. He laughed. That's how compromised he was with the fishing pond. But Aonuma admitted to being impressed with the end result, calling the fishing hole a sacred place, and saying the end result had left him speechless. North of Upper Zora's River, we find Zora's Domain. This village is home to the Zora. It's split between 2 levels, an upper lake and a waterfall basin. The waters are full of Zora, of course. There's also a Goron. We have to visit Zora's Domain at least 3 times. Once in the twilight when we unfreeze it, then when hunting the twilight insects, and once when we're making our way to the Snowpeak region. West of Zora's Domain is Peak Province. It's a snowy mountain region. We're required to visit it once. Snowpeak is generally out of the way and it's sparsely populated. The game's 5th dungeon, Snowpeak Ruins, is found here, along with the Yetis, Yeto and Yetta. They run a snowboarding minigame after the dungeon is complete. There are 6 Poes hidden in the province, a Howling Stone, and 2 hidden grottos. To the west of Lake Hylia is the Desert Province. It's the most isolated and most detached province in the game. There are 3 hidden grottos here and 2 gold bugs. The game's 4th dungeon, the Arbiter's Grounds, is found here, and while not technically part of the province, the 8th dungeon, the Palace of Twilight, is accessed through the desert. Players will also find the hidden Cave of Ordeals. It's an optional combat-focused mini-dungeon. The world of Twilight Princess is absolutely one of the largest worlds in the Zelda series ever to this point. It features a single fast travel system. There are 14 portals spread out across the world. Link can only use the portals while in wolf form. The portals are unlocked by defeating shadow beasts at set points in the world, and set points in the game. There is at least 1 portal in each province. Most provinces contain more than 1, with only Peak Province and Ordona having only 1. The portals are well placed. It's easy to get around the world using them for the most part. There is a slight annoyance in that Midna limits where players can transform into a wolf. She restricts players from transforming in front of NPCs typically. I have run into instances where I believe that I'm out of sight, only to have Midna refuse to allow me to transform. Overall, however, I think the fast travel system works well, and I have no real complaints about the placement of portals. It's clear the developers poured a lot of energy and passion into this world, but my feelings on the end results are mixed. Let me try to work through my feelings and see if I can pinpoint them down overall. Speaking to Nintendo Dream in 2007, Eiji Aonuma said, "We really didn't intend for it to be so big from the beginning. When we chose to go down the realistic path, there were many details from Link and his surroundings that we simply could spare no efforts on. If all of the events happening in the vast land of Hyrule took place in a very compact world, the motivation to save the world would be weaker. He went on to say that the Zelda team expanded on his initial vision for the world by around 20%. In an Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma said he attempted to reel in the scale of the game at one point, but ultimately allowed the game to grow. We kept adding more and more to the game, and this size caused a lot of trouble right up to the end, Aonuma said. Of course, this is not a bad thing, and in the end it has become a Zelda game which has retained a sense of proportion. It's undeniably big, but I believe all those fun elements which make up this world justify its size. Now that we have finished, I feel that with a generation accustomed to watching epic films like Lord of the Rings, when you want to design a convincing world, that sort of vast scale becomes necessary. Overall, I think the scale and the scope of the world works. While the overworld itself isn't as large as the Great Sea of the Wind Waker, I think if we compare the way spaces like dungeons have been expanded, especially considering that dungeons now have large grand spaces within them, there's probably a similar size to the two games overall. I will admit, however, that it's hard to compare the two considering just how different the world of the Great Sea is compared to the land of Hyrule. Still, even if the Wind Waker world is larger, Twilight Princess undoubtedly features one of the largest worlds ever seen in a Zelda game to this point. It's also clear the developers put a lot of effort into creating a world that is visually interesting, with regions that are visually distinct from one another. It's not just layouts, but the materials and the decorative flourishes in each of the game's various regions are unique. In an Iwata Asks interview, series co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto said, "I've often said, half-jokingly, in this game even the sides of ladders have patterns on them." He laughed. And it's true. Things like ladders will have different designs and appearances depending on where you are in the world. Pots, too, vary depending on the region that you're in, and you'll find pots with different appearances in different regions. I get the impression that the developers went a little overboard in creating unique assets for the various areas of the game, and that contributed to some of the development struggles experienced on Twilight Princess. In her 2006 article for Nintendo Power, artist Shinko Takeshita said, "Early in the development process, our team was having a difficult time. Back then, we were obsessed with the belief that we had to invent aspects of the game that were totally new. Our director/producer, Eiji Aonuma, guided us by saying that we would never be able to move forward if all we were doing was creating new elements. He told us to first develop a framework of what a traditional Zelda should be, then take that foundation and add in new facets. That advice got development back on track and helped us relax." In multiple interviews, Aonuma and other team members have stated that while they were working to create a realistic Zelda game, the goal was more of a feeling of realism, not an actual photorealistic simulation or recreation of the real world. Here's how sub-director Kentaro Tominaga phrased it in an Iwata Asks interview. "I don't mean the kind of realism where each individual strand of hair is accurately depicted," he said, "but rather the fact that a shop owner is not likely to give a hearty welcome to a child that comes to their shop in the middle of the night." The shop owner example comes up multiple times in interviews and speeches related to this game. It was apparently something that Shigeru Miyamoto said frequently. Miyamoto himself likened creating a feeling of realism to stage design. He said in an Iwata Asks interview, "It's like setting the scene for a play rather than recreating the world as it is. If you don't tell people they should be making a stage, they go ahead and try to create an entire world. There is an art to how you properly set a stage." The feeling of realism is something that I've spoken of in the past when it comes to considering worlds. Does it feel real? And ultimately, I'm mixed on where Twilight Princess lands. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm not appreciating the work that went into this game. The developers were clearly passionate and worked hard to include as many world-building touches as they could. As mentioned, they put a lot into creating unique art assets for the game to help sell areas as unique and real feeling. They also included a lot of fun details and interactions. For example, there are dogs found in a number of locations in the game. Link can pick these dogs up and carry them, and he seems happy when he does. There are often sticks on the ground placed near the dogs, and Link can pick them up and then throw them around the area in order to play a game of fetch. That's fun. There are sometimes surprising interactions with characters, such as when leaving Agatha's palace if you happen to still have some bugs that you haven't given her. she will call you out on it. It happens only once, but that it happens at all is a nice touch. It's details like this that writer Aya Kiyogoku was focused on putting in the game. In an Iwata-asked interview, she said, "I was always trying to think of subtle things that might or might not be noticed by players. These things are silly in a good way, and I tried to put in as many of them as possible." In line with that, the postman is hidden in various locations around the world. It becomes sort of a game in and of itself trying to find him. It also stands out to me that Agatha can occasionally be found outside the south gate of Castle Town. There aren't many non-player characters who can be found in the overworld, and on the occasion that we do run into a Goron or a Zora in a transitional area, they're generally pretty generic and interchangeable. Finding a recognizable character adds something to the space. The world also has a slight element of dynamism to it. New and stronger enemies are introduced to the field areas following the first act. For example, in Faron Field, many bokoblins are swapped out for stronger variants with metal swords rather than wooden ones. In North Eldin Field, players will find boblin riders, and in West Lanayru they'll find helmosaurs. The added details don't end there. Environmental programmer Makoto Sasaki said his goal was to create small details to invoke the feeling of realism. He said in a 2006 article for Nintendo Power, "Link has been able to cut grass in previous games, but in Twilight Princess cutting grass can be a richer experience. Link's sword is a little longer than before, and unlike previous games in which the sword cutting technique was pretty simple, here he must use the tip of the blade. It's a subtle difference, but environmental programming is all about the art of subtleties." Another example is the spin attack. In Twilight Princess, the spin attack blows grass outside of its range due to its sheer force. There's also a real attempt to make the world feel cohesive and put together, despite obvious seams that players will run into all over Hyrule. While the team was able to create a seamless overworld without any loading screens in the Wind Waker, the Great Sea was what really did a lot of the heavy lifting to make that possible. With Twilight Princess now set on land, the seams and the brief load times are back. We previously also saw this in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. The screen simply fades out in between areas and then fades back in. Still, it's clear that field design lead Atsushi Miyagi and his team attempted to create a cohesive world and to minimize the seams in the world design. He said in his 2006 Nintendo Power interview, "This is a place that has been designed so the player can look out from Hyrule Plains and see exactly where the mountains, lakes, deserts, and rivers you have journeyed through are located. Of course, it isn't perfect, but it's been made with the greatest effort to make it all consistent." And yet, despite all those details and all the effort the designers put into selling the world, I don't really feel entirely sold. I just don't feel the world of Twilight Princess feels as alive as I think the developers hope it will. I think the distinct lack of recognizable non-player characters in field areas is part of this feeling. In the Wind Waker, for instance, we ran into characters like the Salvage Corps and Old Man Ho-Ho in various places around the world map. They moved around, but they had distinct appearances, allowing us to recognize them every time we saw them. Beetle, the traveling merchant, also added to that. Other characters that we met out on the world outside the major settlements didn't move around, but they were each visually distinct, in a way that we just don't see in Twilight Princess. As mentioned, Agatha is the only distinct character to meet out on the field. There's a generic Goron who can help open the path south, giving quick access to Faron Province in the same area. He's indistinguishable from the other Gorons and does not move. We encounter a few of the Zora in locations like Lake Hylia and Upper Zora River outside of the domain, yet I would not be able to tell them apart. On top of that, I just don't think there's any location in the game that's truly as lively and dynamic as, say, Windfall Island in the Wind Waker or Hyrule Town in the Minish Cap. I described each of those locations as having echoes of Clock Town, which is of course the most dense and most alive town that we've seen in the series to this point, and perhaps ever. I think to pin down my own feelings further, we need to pause for a bit and talk about the structure and story. Twilight Princess is one of the most structured games in the series, if not the most structured game overall at this point. It's rivaled only by the Minish Cap. As I've said in the past, since the very first game in the series, the worlds of The Legend of Zelda have gated off various sections of the game. There are essentially two categories of gates. We'll call them hard gates and soft gates. Hard gates require players to obtain certain items or to reach certain story beats before they're allowed to pass. The classic example I use from the very first game is the docks. Those are hard gates. They require a raft to bypass. Soft gates can be passed through if players have the right knowledge or skill. The Lost Woods is a soft gate. It's unlikely players will find their way through on their own, but players who obtain the directions can pass through at any time. Twilight Princess has few, if any, soft gates. The world opens up in stages, and there is a set dungeon order which cannot be varied. Sub-director Kentaro Tominaga mentioned his efforts to gate and structure the game in an Iwata Asks interview. He said, "I really put a lot of effort into naturally leading the player in a particular direction, when we didn't want them straying too far from the main plot of the story. The fact that you can move around freely is one of Zelda's greatest points. But there are definitely situations where you don't want the player to wander into a particular place. So you have to make sure that you guide the player along using the flow of the game without them noticing as they are being guided. This is extremely difficult. And as I worked hard on it, I'd like to say that everyone should pay attention to it, but this is something that players aren't supposed to become aware of. So we can't have them thinking, wow, someone put a lot of effort into making this seem so natural. So in the end, I can't really recommend players pay any attention to that." He laughed. In the first act of the game, players will find that they're pretty stiffly limited on where they can travel. The dark walls of Twilight restrict movement into other provinces. We can't enter those parts of the world until the story dictates. We also encounter damaged or missing bridges that restrict movement, bombable boulders, even honest-to-goodness locked gates that bar the player's path and restrict movement. I wouldn't say that this is too much of an issue, but as I've mentioned, I feel the first act of the game moves in starts and fits. I find the Twilight segments of the game to be terribly uninteresting, which in turn fails to draw me into the world. During the second act of the game, the world opens significantly, and most locations of the world are accessible. In fact, I would say that the game really picks up in the second act. It is a lot more fun, and I found the world to be more interesting when I had more freedom in how I chose to explore it. Now, not everything is open, of course. Dungeons still cannot be reached until the game dictates that they can, and the locations where we find those dungeons will be closed until that point in the story. There's also a number of optional items and treasures on the world map that require a specific item to access. Just as the first act of the game was more gated, the first act is also much more story-heavy. The game gets significantly less story-heavy as we move into the second act. Aonuma explained the reason for this in a 2007 interview with Nintendo World Report. He said, "Because it had the Light World and the Twilight, it was necessary to explain what exactly Twilight was thoroughly, so players understood what exactly the goal was in the game. As Link progressed through the game, he basically lifted the Twilight in these different realms. So toward the end of the game, it wasn't really necessary to focus much on the story, and to focus more on the action. I have shared the criticisms that I have for the story in this game. I don't think it completely holds together, most particularly when it comes to the subplot involving Princess Zelda and her sacrifice for Midna. However, I think there are also potential story elements that relate to the world as a whole that I feel impact that feeling of reality in the game. There is a sense of apathy and detachment in the world of Twilight Princess, and I don't know that this is necessarily intentional on the part of the developers. I think Castletown is the primary example of this. During Princess Zelda's flashback near the beginning of the game showing the fall of Hyrule, we see people within Castletown looking towards the castle as it burns. Yet no one mentions that in any future point of the game. There is no mention of an invading army that burned the castle. When we first enter the Twilight and we explore a waterway beneath the castle, and then on the roof, we run into the spirits of soldiers who are struck by fear. Zelda tells us that all of Hyrule and the Twilight have been turned into spirits, who know only fear. We also see this fear of the Twilight on display again, through Koro and the monkey in Faron Woods, and the children and the residents of Kakariko and Eldin. Yet, when we get to Castletown, the spirits go about their business. They don't speak of the invading army, they don't speak of the burning castle, they don't express any fear for the situation that they're in. Instead, they complain about a water shortage, and how it will impact their bathing habits. When the Twilight is cleared, there's still no discussion of the Twilight, Zant, or anything related to it within Castletown. Castletown is filled with people, but the vast majority of them cannot be interacted with in any significant way. They're really only set dressing, going about their activities without caring about anything else. Then, when the castle is sealed with a magical force field, again, no one acknowledges it. Well, one does, but it is a single Goron who says he's keeping it a secret from everybody. At any rate, the fact that the characters generally don't acknowledge big events in the story adds up to create a disconnected feeling in the world. And so I am mixed. Ultimately, I feel that despite the efforts on the part of the developers to create a world that feels real, Twilight Princess, for me at least, doesn't quite reach that level of realism. I think it is a good solid world for a video game. I have fun exploring it, and it's appropriately dense. The 3D Zelda games have not managed to match the density of the 2D games, but they are getting more dense with each entry. Twilight Princess manages to have more frequent enemy engagements while simply exploring compared to previous 3D entries. There's also plenty of secrets to find with the grottos, caves, and treasure chests that are scattered about, not to mention all the places that Wolf-Link can dig for small prizes. The world overall is good and it's fun to explore. It just ultimately doesn't feel like a place where people truly live and work, in my opinion. Despite the nits that I can pick with Twilight Princess, there's no doubt this game was successful and is beloved. It became the best-selling game in the series, and it held that title until the release of Breath of the Wild. It's also often ranked among the best the series has to offer. It seems apparent to me through interviews that the developers were pleased with this game, and they've got a bit of a soft spot for it. Their passion can be sensed in interviews. I did not come across any stories of people pulling all-nighters or sleeping in Nintendo's offices this time around, so I think we're making progress on the developers being able to establish something of a work-life balance. That said, we still know the developers were putting in a lot of overtime and late hours to pull this off. In an Iwata Asked interview, Aonuma noted, "This was the first game in the series to receive a simultaneous release worldwide. Various localization teams from around the world came to Japan and worked together with us making this possible," he said. Miyamoto added, "They even worked alongside us until late at night." Aonuma replied, "They did. Generally speaking, I heard that most people in other countries tend not to work that late, but these guys sometimes worked until 1 a.m. I'm unaware of any game outside of the Zelda series that took direct influence from Twilight Princess. But the games that followed within the series have generally been influenced by it in some way since." As I mentioned in the very first episode of this season, Twilight Princess started life as the Wind Waker 2. After noting disappointing sales in Japan for the Wind Waker, the team set out with an initial goal of creating something that would bring innovation on the scale of the transition from 2D to 3D. But ultimately, producer Eiji Aonuma made the decision to pivot the game, feeling that such an innovation was not going to happen on the GameCube. The team instead decided to cater to the North American market by creating a dark and realistic Zelda. Twilight Princess wound up straddling 2 console generations, launching on both the GameCube and the Wii. The Wii version incorporated motion controls, making it the first Legend of Zelda game to do so. Motion controls have been a part of every 3D Zelda title ever since then. Skyward Sword obviously leans more heavily into the concept than any of the others. It was developed from the ground up for the Wii, and as such was able to incorporate motion control to even a greater extent than Twilight Princess. Following the release of Skyward Sword, Nintendo Life reported that Aonuma said in an interview with the UK's official Nintendo magazine, "I honestly think we cannot go back to button controls now. So I think that these controls will be used in the future Zelda titles too." Motion controls have stayed a part of the Zelda series ever since, though in a more limited capacity than that quote might suggest. The 3D titles have included motion largely in the form of gyro-based aiming. I'm a fan of it, and I'm glad that it's included. Aonuma noted that motion-based aiming with the Wii Remote was what won him over to the idea of creating a Wii version of Twilight Princess in the first place. So it's perhaps fitting that Twilight Princess's introduction of motion lives on in that way. The Wii was part of Nintendo's strategy to re-engage players in Japan and win over non-gamers. Aonuma noted in his 2007 GDC speech that he felt the addition of motion controls to the Wii version led to the game having that feeling of innovation that he was after when the project was still envisioned as the Wind Waker 2. But Aonuma noted Twilight Princess still underperformed in Japan. Here's what he said in his 2007 GDC speech. You'll hear the voice of his translator.
I thought that all of our hardship and hard work had paid off. However, in comparison, the sales figures were not what I had been hoping for in Japan, and so I believe that many users still had the impression that Zelda was too complicated and therefore too hard to play. Based on this, and realizing that Zelda needed to change even more, I was well aware that getting more people interested in the title was going to be difficult. DS Zelda, which we are planning to release this year, is full of concessions that we made based on this understanding, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of results our efforts bring about.
Now, I should note that Aonuma made those comments only a few months after the game was released. He provides no numbers, but it's plain the game was not performing up to his hopes in his home country at least. He said that was also the case for the Wind Waker as well. I tried to pin down some of the numbers to help provide context for this. There are a couple of graphs that are floating around on the web that claim to show that the Zelda series sales declined overall in Japan following the release of Ocarina of Time. But these graphs don't provide any source information, however, and as such they should be taken with a big grain of salt or just otherwise ignored. The best I could find was a Silicon Era article using data from the Japanese firm Media Create, which showed a steady decline of sales in the series in Japan following Phantom Hourglass, which in turn was generally noted as being a bright spot in the series' performance at that point in Japan. I am not exactly sure what kind of changes were made to Phantom Hourglass based off of Twilight Princess. I'll see what I can learn when I dive into the game next season. I will say, however, that during this period we see the series leans into the unique features of its respective consoles. The DS entries lean hard into touch controls, and the Wii entries lean into motion controls. The series has steadily become more formalized with its tutorials ever since the very first tutorial sequence was introduced in A Link to the Past. I think if we look at the video game industry as a whole, we'll see that there was a general trend towards games explicitly teaching players how to play. Information that normally would have been found in a manual during the NES era was increasingly worked into the games themselves. In that GDC quote we heard just a bit ago, Aonuma mentioned his belief that non-Zelda players had the impression that the series was too complicated. Twilight Princess easily has the largest and most formal tutorial segment in the series to this point, and we will see formal and lengthy tutorial sequences continue forward. I believe this is a way the developers are trying to engage those non-Zelda players, by easing them into the experience more. Titles like the Spirit Tracks and Skyward Sword also take cues from Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess's Tears of Light quest is re-envisioned and improved in both Spirit Tracks and Skyward Sword. Both games introduce stealth elements to the concept. Spirit Tracks will have players dodging enemies to collect Tears of Light from marked locations in dungeon areas, while Skyward Sword revisits them in its Silent Realms, which challenges players not to get spotted by enemies while managing a timer, and locating the tears without the aid of a map. I think the Skyward Sword rendition is the strongest, but it is clearly riffing on Twilight Princess. Skyward Sword also borrows a number of other elements from Twilight Princess. For example, the circular item menu carries forward. The double claw shots also carry forward, as well as the Twilight Princess re-envisioned neutral P-hats. There are a few structural elements to the game and some story beats that also contain echoes of Twilight Princess. And on top of it all, there are visual similarities between the games. Skyward Sword leans more towards a cel-shaded style. But the design of Link in his classic hero outfit in both games features chainmail and a belt across the chest, clearly inspired by Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess also introduced the named provinces to the series for the first time. This includes the main provinces Faron, Eldin, and Lanayru. In his 2007 Nintendo Dream interview, Aonuma explains the origins of these names. He said, "They received their name from the three goddesses in Ocarina of Time. During Ocarina of Time, there were no such places, but after a long time the names grew on the people living there, and so those names were passed on." As a reminder, the Golden Goddesses are named Din, Nehru, and Furore. Their namesake provinces will also appear in games like Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. Twilight Princess is also the series' first true cross-platform release. While the Oracle titles included a bonus for Game Boy Advance players, Twilight Princess is the first game in the series to be developed in parallel for 2 different platforms. We'll see this repeated with the release of Breath of the Wild. And that's not the only connection between Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild. In a 2016 Twilight Princess HD retrospective video posted on YouTube by Nintendo, Aonuma said, "I'm working on the new Legend of Zelda game now. And one thing I've realized as I've been working on it is that a lot of things that I wanted to do with this new Zelda game are things that I thought about while making Twilight Princess. I can't talk about specifics, but to me, Twilight Princess was the starting point in making it possible to do what I'm doing now in a way. The impact of being the director was key, of course, but I think Twilight Princess played a role for me in the approach to making Zelda games. Of course, we put everything we could into Twilight Princess, but I think it'll be fun for people to look back when you play the new Zelda and compare the two. There are a number of visual similarities between Breath of the Wild and Twilight Princess. Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild seems to draw inspiration from the earlier game. Likewise, both games feature the castle as the final dungeon, with players making their way up to the top of the castle to reach a throne room in order to face Ganon. It is interesting to note that Breath of the Wild reintroduced horses to the series after a number of games that did not feature them. And like Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild could perhaps be said to realize an earlier idea from Ocarina of Time with the horses, as Breath of the Wild features multiple horses on the overworld for the first time. Twilight Princess HD introduced Amiibo to the series. Every mainline release in the series, starting with Twilight Princess HD, has included some sort of Amiibo support. That support in Breath of the Wild resulted in Wolf Link living on, as players are able to add an AI-controlled Wolf Link companion to the game. In terms of lore, Twilight Princess showcases the developers' continued re-envisioning of the Zelda timeline. After the game's preview at E3 2005, both IGN and GameSpot, clearly working off of information provided by Nintendo, reported the game would be set a few decades after Ocarina of Time before The Wind Waker. That changed by the time of release, however. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream, "The Wind Waker is parallel. In Ocarina of Time, Link flew 7 years in time. He beat Ganon and went back to being a kid, remember? Twilight Princess takes place in the world of Ocarina of Time, 100 and something years after peace returned to the Kid Link's time. In the last scene of Ocarina of Time, Kid Link and Zelda have a little talk, and as a consequence of that talk, their relationship with Ganon takes on a whole new direction. In the middle of this game, Twilight Princess, there's a scene showing Ganon's execution. It was decided that Ganon would be executed because he'd do something outrageous if they left him be. That scene takes place several years after Ocarina of Time. Ganon was sent to another world, and now he wants to obtain the power." Aonuma introduced the split timeline concept with The Wind Waker. We can see it evolving here, with the placement of Twilight Princess parallel to The Wind Waker. He outlines details here that were not explicitly stated in the game, but help clearly establish where the game fits. To this point, Aonuma has stated that The Wind Waker happens after Link defeats Ganon as an adult. Now he says Twilight Princess happens after Link returns to his childhood, and that information that he gave Zelda somehow changed the course of history. That, in turn, would set Majora's Mask in between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Prior to the release of Four Swords Adventures, Aonuma placed the original Four Swords as the earliest game in the series, so players can reasonably place the Minish Cap as the earliest game following its release. Where exactly the other titles fit is still not clear at this point. It is clear that the developers originally envisioned Ocarina of Time as a prequel for A Link to the Past. Today, they maintain that idea with 3 timelines, placing A Link to the Past as a game that follows a downfall timeline created by an unseen defeat of Link in Ocarina of Time. But at the time of the release of Twilight Princess, it's unclear if that third timeline had been conceived of yet. So while we can reasonably place how titles like A Link to the Past, the Oracle games, Link's Awakening, and the first 2 titles all fit together and form a story, it would have been unclear to players, at least at the time, where they fit in relation to The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. For Aonuma, though, the greatest legacy of Twilight Princess is personal. Twilight Princess is the first game he designed that his family got into and played. He described this story multiple times over the years. It came up during multiple interviews for Twilight Princess HD. His most complete recounting is from his 2007 GDC speech. He describes how his son, who was around 5 years old at the time, asked him for a Wii remote. Aonuma brought home a Wii and a copy of Wii Sports, along with Twilight Princess.
I started by having my son play Wii Sports. I don't mean to praise my own company's product, but even my 5-year-old son was able to play Wii Sports, and it looked like he was having a great time doing it. I thought that this would be the case, so I wasn't all that surprised. Then when he saw the copy of Twilight Princess on the table and asked, "What's this? I want to try this too." I thought it would be too much for him, but because he asked, I started the game up and handed him the Wii remote and nunchuck. Because the controls aren't as simple as with Wii Sports, my son was a little lost in the beginning. After I showed him how the controls work, he was able to fish and call the hawk in Ordona Village, and at the beginning of the game, he slowly got used to the controls and he was finally able to point and shoot targets accurately with his slingshot.
Aonuma described coming home the next day only to find that his wife had started playing to help their son, and then she kept going. Speaking to Nintendo Power in 2016, he said, "I asked her why she decided to play, and she replied that she thought the game would be too difficult for our son to play by himself. So at first she wanted to help him by playing through the first part of the game for him. Before she realized it though, she found she wanted to play through to the end herself." Speaking about this moment during his Miiverse interview, he said simply, "I have lots of memories about Twilight Princess, but that's what made me the happiest." That's it for this week's episode of Legendary Adventures Podcast. We've reached the end of Season 12, but I don't think that we'll leave Twilight Princess just yet. I'm going to add a few bonus episodes here at the end while I work on getting Season 13 on Phantom Hourglass ready. If you want to follow along, please subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, thank you. You are awesome. I'm Paul Riley, and I will see you next week.